Good morning, all. My name is Aaron Hager from the University of Illinois, and I'm going to be actually splitting this discussion with a colleague, Tom Reed from TeeJet.
Morning.
And what I'll try to do, I guess, is give you a little bit of flavor for some of the challenges that we face now with some of the issues related to weed species that chemically we're having a very, very difficult time controlling. And we'll focus on one species in particular, simply because it's become about the most problematic species that we have in Illinois. So in Illinois, we have anywhere from roughly about 22, 23 million acres of corn and soybean every year. This is a species that in a reasonably short period of time, I would say within the last probably 20 years, has moved from a species that probably 2 people in the whole state even knew what it was 20 years ago, and now being a species that if you found 2 people involved in phases of production agriculture who didn't know what this is, that would be a lot. And the species that we talk a lot about is actually a species of pigweed. It's called water hemp. Now, is this one that, have you folks heard of water hemp before? Okay. How about, have you heard of another one, a relative of water hemp called Palmer amaranth? Yes. Okay. What do you know about Palmer? If I can just ask. Okay. Palmer is a species that is changing agricultural production practices in areas that it occurs, primarily in the Mid-South and Southeastern U.S. Water hemp is a species that's, let's say, bad enough. Palmer is twice as bad. You have a species in water hemp that literally can put on about an inch to 1.5 inches of growth per day. Palmer, on the other hand, can grow 3 to 4 inches a day. So when we think about, well, how will that impact folks in this particular room? Well, the example that I'll give people, if you had an infestation of Palmer, and if you decided, well, I'm going to wait and start spraying beans, corn in the afternoon, I'm going to wait and go in for lunch, you might have a plant that's in label before you go in for lunch. It literally could be out of label by the time you get to that field in the afternoon. Okay. That's sort of the flavor for some of these pigweed challenges. But with water hemp and resistance, this species has several biological characteristics that really help it evolve resistance to various herbicides. Now, when we say resistance, I'll define that basically as we have a herbicide that at one time was very effective against this species. It no longer is effective. Okay? By no longer effective, we'll just define that. You would spray that population in field, whatever, and it continues to grow. Okay? One is that water hemp and actually Palmer are what's known as dioecious species. And what that means is that any plant that you come across in the field is either male or female. All right? And all male plants do is make pollen, and all female plants do is make seed. Now, when you have that type of biology, what that means is that you have to have cross-pollination to occur. That pollen has to travel from the male plants to the female plants. Now, female plants are capable of producing large amounts of seed. You have a ballpark idea of how many seed a female water hemp plant might be able to make? Over 1 million. Okay? Now, there's a rule in nature that says that when you have a dioecious species, that pollen flow does not have to come from just one male. Okay? So let's do a little math. I'm terrible in math, so it's very, very rudimentary and very, very simple math. That's the only kind I know. If you had a female water hemp plant capable of making 1 million seeds, what's the minimum number of different flowers that have to be on that female plant in order to make 1 million seeds? Okay, here's where it gets real simple. I'm going to help you. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. So if she can make 1 million seeds, she has to have at least 1 million flowers, right? Okay. Now, theoretically, how many different males could donate pollen to fertilize those 1 million flowers? Theoretically, you could have 1 million different pollen donors. So what that leads to is a species that has a tremendous amount of genetic diversity. That's exactly what you need to facilitate selection for herbicide resistance. Okay? Now that's what water hemp Palmer grows the exact same way. And to illustrate this, in Illinois, we have populations of water hemp now that have evolved resistance to 5 different herbicide families. Products that are ALS inhibitors, things like Pursuit, Raptor, triazines, atrazine would be a good example, PPO inhibitors, Flexstar, Reflex, Cobra, glyphosate, Roundup, Touchdown, HPPD inhibitors, the newest chemistry in the marketplace, only been commercially available for a little over 10 years, and we have populations that are resistant to these: Callisto, Lotus, Impact. Now in the state of Nebraska, they've also identified a population that is resistant to 2,4-D. 2,4-D was first commercialized about 70 some odd years ago. Okay? There's a company that's headquartered just a few miles north of here that's developing soybean varieties that will be resistant to 2,4-D. This potentially could really impact how widespread that technology is actually used for how long. This is something that's been going on for quite a while. This actually started with resistance in water hemp back in the 1990s. Actually about the early to mid 1990s when we started to see these types of resistance. And you can look down through that list, and what you begin to recognize is that there's a whole lot of options now for that once were effective to manage water hemp that are no longer effective. Now, years and years ago, when you had a problem of resistance evolving, what was a common way that that was solved? The common way it used to be solved was the industry simply brought out a new material. They developed a new herbicide. That's not going to happen anymore, or at least not at the pace that we saw development back in the 70s and the 80s. You had to take a ballpark guess. How much do you think it cost a company to bring a new herbicide to market? Draw a number.
40 million.
Okay.
100 million.
Okay. Right now, it's about $250 to $300 million. That's one of the reasons this is slowed. And when you see the number and types of resistances that have evolved in this number one driver of broadleaf species across many acres of the Midwest, what this tells you is that in order to solve this problem with a new herbicide, you're going to have to develop and market something that's brand new. Novel target site, never been commercialized before. Because you have resistance already to HPPD inhibitors, why would you bring a new one into the marketplace? You have resistance to glyphosate, we don't need another glyphosate. We need something that would be brand new. Now there's a government agency called the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and one of their charges is to register new pesticides. That is not an easy process. And out of that $300 million it would cost you to develop a new herbicide, you're going to spend about 70% of that before you ever get that EPA label. What happens one Friday afternoon if you made that decision to develop that material and you get a call at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon from the EPA that says, sorry, we found something we don't like, you're not going to get a label. You're done. That's why this pace of development is going to be slow. Now, resistance in water hemp to 6 different herbicide families. If you had glyphosate resistance, if you had ALS resistance or triazine, that by itself is a challenge. This is not going to be the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is going to be this. Whether it's water hemp or palmer, and that's multiple herbicide resistance, right? Now, what we mean by that is this. You can talk about multiple resistance at the level of population or the individual. At a population level, think of that as a field. Doesn't matter, 20 acre, 40 acre, 100 hectare in Canada, it doesn't matter. If you had plants in here, you're gonna have some that would be sensitive. Any herbicide could control it. That works almost in every instance. You'll have some that might be resistant to herbicide A, whichever one that is. Okay? You'll have some that are resistant to herbicide B. What's your solution to that problem? C? Exactly. C. Or what happens if you put A and B together? That'll work too, right? Okay. On the individual level, however, now you have plants that are resistant to both A and B. Now what do you do? Will that tank mix of A and B work? Not there. C might still work, but what is C? That's the challenge that we're going to have. And the reason we say that this is becoming more common, based on some survey work that we've done for several years now, what we do is we actually screen samples that people would send us free of charge. What we use, we actually use molecular assay. We don't do these types of screens in the greenhouse anymore. We have techniques now that we can do it very, very quickly, very, very rapidly. And so we started this in 2009. We did it again in 2010, 2011. Again, DNA-based assays for resistance to glyphosate, things like the diphenyl ethers, Flexstars, Cobras, for example, and ALS resistance. And what we're looking for is to try to document how many of these are actually resistant to more than one herbicide family. Because if you think about soybean, for example, if you had a population that's resistant to glyphosate, PPO, and ALS, and that thing comes out of the ground, and you have customers that want to run your spray equipment on conventional soybeans or Roundup Ready soybeans, what are their options to chemically control that? The answer is there are no chemical options. Okay, that's why we're very concerned about this. Now, we will tell you that what we're going to look at for these data, these are very small samples. We ask for 5 plant samples from each field. Okay, and all we do is we take about the top 2 inches of that plant, cut it all, put it in a plastic bag, and then mail it to us. Then I actually give it to the real smart people that run molecular assays because I don't know what they mean, don't know how to run them, but I know what the results are. Okay. So what we're actually going to look at for numbers, just rest assured that these data very likely underestimate, not overestimate, greatly underestimate the frequency of resistance that actually occurs. Okay? So, when we talk about multiple resistance, when you have 3 herbicides, you have 8 possible combinations for outcomes. So we're going to look at the data on the Venn diagram. One outcome is that you have a plant that's sensitive to all 3. So that number would actually reside outside of any of those 3 circles. You might have a plant that's resistant only to herbicides that inhibit ALS. Okay, so that number would be right here. Notice it's not in any area that's overlapped by the other circles. Right? 3 would be resistant to PPOs. 4 is resistant to what? Glyphosate. Okay. What's 5 resistant to? PPOs and glyphosate. 6 would be glyphosate and ALS, right? 7, ALS, PPO. Where's the last number go? Superweed. Yeah. Right in the middle. That's one that's resistant to all 3. Okay? All right. This is 2010 data. In 2010, we had 122 plant samples submitted from 24 fields. All right? I will tell you, in 2011, that number went from 122 to over 500. Okay? Now, we've got these broken down again on an individual plant basis and a field basis. Okay? Because this will impact how we can manage these things. 66% of the plants were resistant to glyphosate. That's a big number. Okay? Now, you can look at all these possible combinations that you want to, but roughly, let's say if these data do actually underestimate, let's just assume that that number right here is 10%. 10% of those plants are resistant to 3 different herbicides. And again, if we run this scenario in soybean especially, we don't have a chemical option to control this. Either glyphosate resistant or conventional soybean. All right? On a field basis, there were no fields that did not have resistance in them. Every field had at least one type of resistance that was present. Almost one-third of those fields had 3 different types of resistance in that field. Okay. That's why we say that this is the type of resistance that's going to become more and more challenging. Here's Illinois, for example. This is the location where those samples came from in 2011. Most recent year that we've done this. Now, a lot of people assume that most of the resistance is in southern Illinois. That's not a valid assumption. This is a problem that's going to occur statewide, and it is occurring statewide right now. Okay. If you would extrapolate this over to Indiana, they're beginning to find problems with water hemp over the western side of the state. Very, very common problem in the state of Missouri, Iowa as well, Wisconsin, Minnesota. These are the counties now in Illinois where we have confirmed resistance to PPO water hemp. Flexstar, Cobra, Blazier, that type of chemistry. Now, if you find counties in here that aren't highlighted, does that mean it doesn't occur there? The answer is no. It's more than likely there. We simply haven't had the right sample yet from that location, from that county to verify it. This is your option. This is one option for water hemp. Okay? Your other option, of course, is glyphosate. You have glufosinate. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you overlap these areas that we have concern about, if you accept the fact or the assumption that we're making that multiple resistance is going to become more common, what do? The answer is we don't really have a good solution for this. Okay. What we do have are recommendations to try to manage this, especially in soybean. We first came out with these recommendations in 2008. They went over like a lead balloon Because in 2008, much of the mindset was still, all we need is glyphosate. We don't need anything else. We don't want to use residual herbicides. We don't want to spray twice. We want one shot of glyphosate across the field and that's it. Folks, those days are gone. The frequency of fields that system will work on, the slope is like this, towards zero. Okay? Full rates of soil residual herbicides. 10 years ago, the number of acres in Illinois that had soil residual herbicide in front of soybeans was almost single digit. We would suggest that number will probably be approaching 80% very quickly. We said you have to make the initial post-application before water hemp exceeds 3 to 5 inches. Folks figured out real quickly that, glyphosate can kill big weeds. So instead of when we used to start here with the post spray, all of a sudden now we tend to start when stuff is about here. We can't do that anymore. We're going to have to go back to here. Okay? We're talking about scouting fields again after the first application. We're talking about re-treating, re-scouting again. Folks, we're actually getting down to some of these recommendations. All we're trying to do is keep the amount of seed that's produced by these resistant plants from being as high as it could be. You got female plants that will make 200,000 to a million seeds. You can lose the field with this stuff pretty quickly. Okay. How about Liberty? How about glufosinate versus glyphosate? Glufosinate is a viable alternative to glyphosate for control of these resistant populations. Right? A lot of people think, well, glufosinate and glyphosate, they're both pretty similar, right? Well, both are non-selective, both have no soil residual activity, and both begin with the letter G. You drop south of that first line, there is nowhere near alike. Absolutely nothing alike. Glyphosate, if you get a little bit on the leaf surface, that's probably going to be enough to kill that plant because it translocates extensively. You can bump that rate up and control bigger plants. We're not going to be able to do that with glufosinate. Glufosinate-sized weeds is right here. If we start spraying weeds with Liberty right here, it's not going to work. Okay. What does that tell you about application technologies? We've got a lot of people right now, all they've ever sprayed is glyphosate. A lot of young people retail outlets. That's not going to work anymore. For example, here's an untreated area of soybean. That's all water hemp between the rows. Soybean right here, right here, right here. Every other green thing in there is not soybean. That's the density that this thing can grow at. That's the first year after we discovered resistance in that field. This was treated with Liberty. Took that photograph 7 days after that application. 7 days later, we would have had to come back in to respray the field. We didn't get adequate coverage of that dense population. Here's the same rate of Liberty, taken 7 days after it was applied, but it had pre-emergence herbicide underneath it. We're good to go with that. So how many applications now have we done on that field? We've gone historically from trying to do things with one shot across the field. We can't do that anymore. We're going to have to be running over these fields more than once. This is Palmer. This is Palmer amaranth. Looks a lot like a lot of other pigweeds until it gets this size. That's a nightmare. This is a pigweed species right here that's been responsible for a lot of acres of cotton in the Mid-South and Southeast to be mowed down because they can't control it. They would rather mow down those fields than let this thing go to seed. We're going to find more of this in the Midwest also. Matter of fact, we're finding more and more of it in Illinois, the central part of Illinois. We don't like that. It will change farming in Illinois eventually. If you let this thing go in 3 years, you could literally lose the field to it. It's happening. Growth rate, probably 3 to 4 times that of soybeans. Again, Palmer, for example, comparing Palmer and water hemp. Water hemp on average, maybe 2 inches a day if you do the calculations based on some published work. Water hemp or Palmer on the other hand, anywhere from 3 to 4 inches a day. Okay. We're talking about a species again 20 years ago that few people even knew about. Now it's a game changer in water hemp. Okay. We've got multiple resistance to the point now where we have to change. Mother Nature is forcing us to change practices. We can no longer do this one shot across the field and feel good about it because it simply will not work. There's new technology coming. Some of these resistance traits, and this is where it's going to be very, very important because Dow's working on resistance to 2,4-D. Monsanto and BASF are developing varieties that are resistant to dicamba. What do we know about 2,4-D dicamba? A lot of broadleaves are very sensitive to those. Rose bushes are broadleaves. Peach trees are broadleaves. Off-target movement with these products is going to be the potential for that will be game-changing. Okay. We cannot apply these types of products in a 15-mile-an-hour wind, or at least not very long before somebody in government agency will take notice of it. Okay. When we talk about an integrated system, what we're talking about is trait rotation, herbicide rotation, residual herbicide, mechanical tactics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If there's truth to the statement that we've heard for many years, that Roundup Ready technology allowed farmers to farm more acres, what do we do when that technology doesn't work as well anymore? My assumption is that I don't think farmers are going to just put all that land up for sale if they can't farm it anymore. That usually doesn't happen. I think what's going to happen, if we think about, well, we've gone from an era that we make one pass across the field and call it good, that's done. That's gone. What we're going to see in the near future, folks, is we don't have enough equipment in the Midwest to handle all the applications that we're going to have to make. We don't have enough people in the industry to run that equipment that we're going to need to treat these fields timely. Okay. If you go from one shot around it to now a residual followed by glyphosate, you have literally doubled the number of applications. There's still only 24 hours a day. My point is that I think one thing is going to have to happen. More rigs in the field that are going to be sold. We're going to have more people operating too. Questions? Before I turn this over to Tom. A lot of people sometimes I give this talk and I say, well, you got any good news? I said, I hate to be labeled as a pessimist, but folks, I'm more of a realist. This is real.
Is 2,4-D restricted up here after a certain date?
No, it's not. In cotton area, it is.
Texas.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
Back where Eastern North Carolina real bad, and people are pulling it out of the field, and if you leave the field, it'll sprout right back up. We've had calls for row crop cultivators that we haven't had a problem.
Had a farmer at a meeting last summer, sat across the table from me at lunch, and he said, you know, I was going to trade in a bunch of old pieces of equipment on something, I should get a new tractor or something like that. And he said, one thing I had was an agro cultivator. And he said, I went to sat down across the table from the equipment dealer, and he said, you really want to trade in that cultivator? He said, I think you ought to hang on to it. The farmer asked me, he said, what do you think about that statement? I looked at him right in the eye and said, I think you're right. I think you better hold on to that for a while. Other questions?
Conservation tillage is going to get tougher and tougher.
You know, a colleague of mine from Western Tennessee, Dr. Steck, he's just at the same field I was at yesterday, as a matter of fact, and he's very concerned because they've got a lot of HEL ground in Western Tennessee that's being mobile right now. That's how desperate folks are with this moment. They can't get it under control, and the way said NRCS just, they don't have a fit about this. But it's either you do that or you don't farm those acres. Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, Aaron's done a great job of outlining the problem. I always like to look at it and think, you know, there's a problem there, but with every problem comes an opportunity. And what he was just getting at, the opportunities there for everyone in the equipment industry, people like ourselves that are in the nozzle industry. It's going to become a little more of a management issue, but I think if we know what we're doing, we can guide our customers properly, that there's an opportunity to do it. So how does it fit in with the equipment side of it? Well, from the spray nozzle side, if you take a look at nozzle selection, it's really going to be based on the mode of action of the chemical that we're applying. And as Aaron said, it's been a Roundup industry for the last 20 years. So where is the development of equipment going, or spray nozzle development? It's always been moving towards less drift, bigger droplet size. But that's no longer going to be the case with some of the new products that have to be applied to control some of these resistant weeds. So we're going to have to take a look at the chemical and ask ourselves, how does this product work? What's the mode of action? Is it contact where it only has activity where that droplet sits on the leaf, something like a glufosinate, paraquat, or is it something like Roundup where it's fully translocated and coverage isn't as critical? That's going to be a real determiner of what the nozzle is for the right application. To understand a little more about it, we have to understand what droplet size is, how it works. And now for any nozzle, it doesn't matter what type of nozzle that you're going to recommend to a customer, that nozzle produces a range of droplets from small to large within that spectrum that comes out of that spray tip. And they measure that droplet size in a unit called microns. Microns are very, very small. You'll find there's 25,400 microns in 1 inch. So when we start talking about droplet sizes, it gives you some indication just how many are in there. But let's put it in perspective a little bit. About 2,000 microns is about the thickness of pencil lead. You get down at 420 microns, it's about the thickness of staple. 150, sewing thread. Down at about 40 microns is the visibility threshold where we can't see droplets under 40 microns. But you'll see these ones at the bottom that I've colored red. That's great as far as knowing the size of those, but the reason they're red is those are droplets that once they leave the spray tip, they become very difficult to control. So we try generally to avoid spraying too much that's in this range. As Aaron mentioned, you know, some of these chemistries are going to be very sensitive on crops or ornamentals or fruits and vegetables that are nearby, so we have to be really cautious. Droplet size technology has really advanced in the last several years. There's a number of different laser equipment that is used in the industry to measure those, so they're getting much more accurate. The industry, universities, chemical companies, manufacturers are all starting to collaborate more on that information. So why is the droplet size important? Well, we talked a little bit about this yesterday when we were doing the demos out in the field, and this slide illustrates that if you decrease the droplet diameter from a spray tip by 1/2, you can get 8 times as many droplets from the same amount of liquid. So this could be a nozzle putting out a 500 micron droplet at 10 gallons an acre, and we choose a different nozzle that produces a 250 micron droplet, and all of a sudden we have 8 times as many droplets, which means what? More coverage. So some of these new products that are like the glufosinates that are going to require better coverage, we might need to be looking at nozzles that are doing this as opposed to over here, a spray tip that maybe is applying Roundup. Here's just a good way to visualize it in the field. These are some actual pictures done on a turf application, but you can see here you have your large droplets. Now we apply that same product with smaller droplets. You can see all the blue droplets in there that had the dye in it, and how many more droplets we got, how much better the coverage is by reducing that droplet size. Now, we don't expect applicators to become experts in droplet size and measurement and micron terminology. So to try to make it a little bit easier for people to reference it in the industry, they've developed some standards and a new classification system that's going to be incorporated in the chemical labels. It's already starting to show up. It's a ASAE, the American Society of Ag Engineers, and what they've done is develop a system where they can assign certain droplet sizes to a category for a spray tip based on the characteristics of that spray. It'll allow you to help your customers because you'll be able to compare different nozzle types. And it'll probably be on, Aaron, you might have a comment on this. How soon do you expect that they will put this? It's already on some of the labels. Have you heard any time frame when it's going to apply on all of them?
Not necessarily, and usually, right, historically, most labels have tried to say, you know, use coarse droplets, for example, for herbicides. Sometimes on fungicides, it might actually be try to go more to a fine droplet for the coverage underneath the leaf surface, but these things are beginning to change, and it'll be very good, you know, the label by itself, pesticide label, whether it's herbicide, fungicide, insecticide, is a really good source of information for a lot of the recommendations from the manufacturer.
This is an example of the current standard. Now yesterday we passed out during the spray demonstrations, we had catalogs available. If you go to the back of the TeeJet catalog, there's 2 pages for a good number of the spray tips that show how they are classified according to this system. And they go from extremely fine down the scale to ultra coarse. And you can see, again, if you're looking right here, even the medium to fine category, remember we said under 150 microns or so, it's very difficult to control where those droplets go. So, you know, in reality, in practicality, medium to ultra coarse is really what we're going to be looking at in the field, because those ones we have a lot better control of. I even get a little bit concerned that medium droplets under some of the conditions we see out here are sometimes hard to control. So these will be on the labels, as he said, that in the catalog. This is an example of how they might be used. Take, for instance, this top chart right here. That happens to be a turbo TeeJet nozzle. Now, down the left side is the color coding that's used to indicate the size or capacity of the nozzle. These other colors across here are the droplet sizes as we go across different pressures. Let's just take an example. Here's a TT11004. If we go across, we can see at 15 psi, it's an extremely coarse droplet. As we get up to 20 and 25, it's very coarse. From 30 up to 60, it's coarse. 70 psi and beyond, it's medium. So you can see how that information is going to be used. A lot easier to direct your customers, applicators, to use in this chart than it is to get into all this individual micron size. Here's an example of a label, Callisto herbicide, just highlighted here where it says on the label, use spray nozzles that provide a medium to coarse droplet size. So asking questions is about what they want to apply. I don't pretend to be an expert on all the different chemicals and all these different names, so I usually try to draw out from people what the product is, what the mode of action is, how it works, do a little homework before making a suggestion. Because that's going to help determine whether we're suggesting a spray tip with smaller droplets or a spray tip with larger droplets. With that in mind, and as Aaron said, now in some cases it's up, you said, as much as 80% soil applied. It's making a comeback where it was used many years ago. It hasn't been. But having these different applications and different modes of action is going to change what we might recommend in the spray tip side. If we take soil applied herbicides, for example, generally they use larger droplets. They're applied in the spring when it's windy. You're counting on soil moisture when you don't have years like this year, but when you have normal years and soil moisture, rainfall is going to help to distribute that chemical in the soil profile. And so you'll generally use nozzles that produce larger droplets. Now I put 3 here that I kind of broke into trying again to simplify it a little bit for everyone as to what I would suggest to an applicator. And that would include looking at a turbo flood jet, air induction or an AI tip, or the turbo TeeJet induction. These are all, if you look in the catalog at the droplet size categories, they are all in that larger end of the spectrum. Turbo flood jet tip, this just shows an example of one spraying. That provides a very even distribution. It's a great nozzle for soil applied applications. It uses some technology here of a pre-orifice to provide low drift, very large droplets. I think it's important not to confuse that with the old standard flood jet. And the old standard flood jet was just a straight hole across the deflector. You can see what that pattern looks like and what the distribution is. Not very uniform. There's a reason why the new turbo flood jet was developed, and I try to strongly suggest to applicators that they stay away from this nozzle. You can get small droplets in here and driftable droplets. The heavier droplets are on the outside, which make these heavy edges. So if you can get them towards a turbo flood for a soil applied, it's a better alternative. Another one, if they want to stay in a fan type nozzle, is an air induction nozzle. These work by, you have a pre-orifice right here at the nozzle, and it draws air in both sides or inducts air in. The two come down and mix in this chamber. And then right at the orifice, right here, is where it will distribute that chemical out in a fan pattern. It uses a Generally 30 to 40 psi minimum, can go up as high as 100 psi, but it's going to be in the category of extremely coarse or ultra coarse droplet size. So very good choice on, again, keeping drift under control. Another one, a little bit newer nozzle, is taking the existing turbo TeeJet technology, it's been around for a number of years, and put an air induction into it. And that air induction in this nozzle draws in the side and comes up and mixes through the nozzle and comes out. Of all the flat fan style nozzles, this is going to have your largest droplets. Excellent for soil applied, putting on these behind a planter. It's going to be probably the spectrum on it from 15 to 100 psi in all the sizes. You're in the ultra coarse droplet size range. So it's a really good choice for soil applied. What if we're not doing soil applied, we're coming back to systemic products, products like Roundup. Again, we try to use larger droplets on things like Roundup because it only takes a few droplets to go in the wrong place, and because of the nature of that product being systemic or translocated in the plant, you can have a lot of problems. So coverage isn't as critical. It's mainly drift control that we're targeting here. 3 nozzles that would fall in that category would be the AI XR, that's the air inducted XR extended range nozzle, the AI, or the turbo TeeJet induction nozzle. Now we already talked about 2 of those 3, so I'm just going to add in here what the AI XR is. This is air induction, comes up the sides, both sides of the nozzle, and is drawn in at this venturi right here. We have a little pre-orifice, so the spray mixes in here, produces some air-filled droplets. This can run at a lower pressure than a standard AI nozzle is. That's why it has the extended range name on it. So 15 to 35 psi is a good pressure range for systemics and large droplets. It's a little bit smaller in droplet size than the AI or the TTI. What if you're doing contact herbicides? What if it's not glyphosate, but it's the glufosinate that requires that better coverage? What choice do we go with along those lines? And your contacts are only going to be, those droplets are only active at the point they land on the plant, so coverage is critical. So you have 2 choices, go smaller droplets, because what did we say, 8 times as many droplets if we cut the size in half? Or the other alternative, look at a little higher application volume. We may have to start in some of these applying the higher volumes than what we're accustomed to. We've gotten, I don't want to say spoiled, but we've been very fortunate with glyphosate, Roundup, that we've been able to apply that in low volumes. It can cover a lot more acres per tank full. And that may not be the case with the contact herbicides, and thus the need maybe for more equipment in the future to get the job done. But 2 of the spray options for the contact type herbicides are the extended range and the turbo TeeJet tip. And here we're looking at an extended range or XR nozzle, available like 80 or 110 degrees. It's the smallest droplets of all the flat fan style tips. If you look these up in some of the charts in the catalog, you're going to see this is getting you in that medium category. They can run 15 to 60 psi. Obviously, smaller droplets occur at higher pressures. Could be a good choice. I get a little nervous because that medium category, when we were out there yesterday and we were set these up and we had a little bit of a breeze and there was a nice cloud moving off target on it. So medium could be a kind of a challenge. I think a better alternative possibly is going to be the turbo TeeJet. This has slightly larger droplets than the XR nozzle. It gets into the coarse category. It has a very wide pattern just due to the nature of this nozzle. Liquid comes down through a pre-orifice. Here's your exit orifice right here. Produces a wider pattern than the normal flat fan nozzle, which lends to very good uniformity along the boom. Has a wide operating range, and you can still get those smaller droplets. If you want to get into medium droplets, you can do it at higher pressures. So what do we do, though, if we have a combination? What if we've got tank mixes? What if we're tank mixing something that's systemic with something that's contact? That gets to be a little bit of a challenge. How are you going to apply it? And you might consider we go maybe middle of the road. Maybe we go with coarser droplets, keep drift down, but we take our spray volumes up. It's a little bit of a challenge. I don't know to have the answer for that, but you might consider using spray tips that have a wide operating range of pressure, so you can vary the pressure a little bit given the operating conditions outside and the wind conditions. I would consider, I lump these in here to be kind of your turbo TeeJet. That's to the smaller end of the spectrum. You have your AIXR up to the little bit on the higher end, but not in the ultra coarse or extremely coarse side. Another possibility would be a turbo twin jet. That's going to have droplet sizes similar to the turbo TeeJet, but it has that dual fan, so you can get a little bit better coverage of the weeds by hitting them from two directions. There's a variety of resources available. I mean, I know probably all of you are familiar with the catalog, but take a look in the back of it at the droplet size information. That's handy. The website, it's an excellent website. You can get a wealth of information off that. If you ever have any difficulties navigating it, call us. We can walk you through it, but there's a lot of stuff there. Another good thing, I don't have one with me, it just printed. It's an adhesive 8.5 by 11 sheet adhesive called a tank sticker. You can put it on your spray tank, you can put it inside the cab, but it has droplet size information for all the primary nozzles on it and GPA information. So it's a really good reference guide for a grower to have access to. Probably the best one if you have a smartphone, Android, iPhone, there's a free app that was just released. And this lets you go in, you can go and do your calibration calculations to help you determine what size nozzle you need. Once you know the size of the nozzle, you can say, help me select a nozzle based on droplet size. You go in and if you say, I want a coarse droplet, based on what you told it the gallons per acre you need, it'll tell you, here's this nozzle, here's the pressure you need to run it at in order to get a coarse droplet and get the gallons per acre you want. It's really, really useful tool that if you're out in the field, you need to make a quick recommendation. That could prove very valuable.
Is that app at y'all's website or is it just there?
It's on the iTunes website. There's a link on the TeeJet website. We have a link that'll take you over to the iTunes or, different, depending whether you have an Android phone or an iPhone, it'll take you to the right place. Aaron, anything you'd like to add here on this side of things? Any questions?
Real quick, besides the hemp, is there like horsetail or anything? Is there anything going on in Illinois with that?
Horseweed, you mean?
Yeah, horseweed.
Yes, yeah. That's unfortunately very, very common here in Indiana, and we're becoming more and more common in Illinois as well. Horseweed, marriage-tail, whichever name it usually goes by marriage-tail. It's very, very common to have glyphosate-resistant marriage-tail in the southern part of Illinois, south of Interstate 70. We're seeing more and more of it between Interstate 70 in the south and Interstate 80 in the north.
Any others? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.